Welcome to our program, Coach to Coach. Today's guest is Asanka Abayasiri. Asanka had a 20-year career in corporate customer experience management and technology services, and has always had an interest in people and their well-being. Since 2017, Asanka has been on a journey to broaden his understanding of how life works by traveling internationally and training in a number of fields, including Reiki, Shamanism, Pranic Healing, the completion process, Metaphysical Anatomy Technique, and the 3 principles. Asanka and I met when we were both training with Jamie Smart on his Clarity Coach certification program. We were paired up for peer coaching and have been talking frequently ever since. I'm so grateful for getting to work with Asanka and to learn a whole bunch of stuff that I had literally no idea about. Thank you for joining us today, Asanka. It's so nice to see you.
It's great to be here, Greg.
Great. Well, the way I like to start these discussions out is to ask what first sparked your interest in coaching?
I was thinking about this question earlier, and what actually occurred to me was I was brought up in a Buddhist family, and in Sri Lanka, so temples are abundant. They're like everywhere, and once a month in a full moon, everybody tends to go. And I was imbued with this, that calm, quiet feeling of peace and that stillness from such an early age. So it was I had quite a natural affinity to it. But as I grew up, I was beginning to, notice people go to temples and everybody feels awesome. But outside, there's this whole reality world going on, and people doing what they need to do to survive. And it was like a discrepancy. It's like, I guess, to me at the time, it looked like there's something wrong with Buddhism that people are like that, whereas now I'm like, well, that was actually a clear depiction of spirituality aspect of a human being, and then the human aspect of a person, which I didn't realize. But that, I guess, discrepancy just made me wonder, since then, about what's going on, how does all this work? And as I was becoming a teen and going through what teens do, I began to notice how, like, my life experience was quite different to my friends, and their families were different to mine. So I was just really curious as to why that is the case. And I met a couple of cool friends when I was in grade 12 who introduced me to this world of, energy and formlessness of reality. And I just became really curious. So it just became a curiosity, just growing on itself, and wanting to know more. And I might hear about a cool approach to see things, and I'm like, oh, let's find out more about that. And that sounds cool, and let's go explore a little bit there. So I was kind of like I wouldn't say seeker. I was more like a inspired researcher, I guess, in a way, just to understand. And I had this motto back then: I want to crack the code of life. And I think now that looking back, I wanted to figure out, how can I guess, have an easier time navigating things. But now looking back, it's like, yeah, I don't think I ever cracked it, and it's now more like seeing the codes of life as to how it works. Although you can't see the codes, but you can actually sense the workings of those codes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it was a natural curiosity, just growing into a journey of research and discovery. And as one of my friends recently put it, it's as though my journey has become the job, if you like. And I'm like, oh, that's a cool way to put it. So yeah, and that's how it unfolded.
Very cool. Yeah, I love your openness to all sorts of different techniques or methods or fields or ways of looking at things, and not being married to any one of them. It's just, such a refreshing level of curiosity about all of them, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for the teachers who said, like, use your own discernment, like what feels true for you, and follow that. And I remember actually I was having a conversation at a lunch with the HR manager of one of the companies I work for. I was telling him, I'm not sure what the next step for me career wise and so on. He's like, for a year, don't listen to anyone. Just see what you, and this is coming from a corporate manager and obviously he was a very spiritual person. And yeah, and it made perfect sense to me. So I think I'm very grateful for all those people who constantly and continuously just pointing back to me as to what's true for you, what resonates for you. So yeah, that's been really helpful.
Right. So the next question is, tell us about your practice, how you're working, and who you're helping.
How do I work? Who I help? One of the things that I've realized is all these different things that I've learned and explored. They're all pretty much pointing to the same thing. Like, it's like um it's like if you think of a diamond, they got all these different facets, and they're all reflecting a different shade of light, if you like. So the same way, all these different things I've explored, they reflect a certain aspect truth of life, and essentially the way how I work with people is really begin to understand, first of all, how they see life, and what makes sense to them and what is true for them, and that beautiful question of who they think they are in terms of what view of themselves, what feeling view of them is driving them, and how that feeling perspective of themselves that driving them to go in this direction or that direction, career wise, family wise, aspiration wise. So just getting to know that, first of all, is first and foremost, what inspires me, and from that perspective, I kind of get to get in their boat, if you like, and then begin to share what I have seen to be true as to how this whole extraordinary life works, and because I mean, you and I, know about what we're talking about in terms of, where our experience comes from and who we truly are, and because those are fundamental universal truths, when I'm sharing them from that deepest truth feeling perspective and feeling state, people hear it, people feel it themselves. It's like you and I often talk about the tuning fork effect. When we are in that particular truth, people sense it, people feel it, and that allows people to connect to that deeper realms of themselves that they often don't notice, and include myself. I'm most of the time I'm in my human side as opposed to my true essence. So sharing that allows people to connect with that much more expansive, deepest sense of themselves, from which they find the answers they need. They see through their problems. They see through the work challenges or family challenges or whatever that they're caught up in. So effectively, that's a broad overview of how I connect and explore with people. Doesn't feel right to say work, because it doesn't feel like work for you and I with this work. It's like a joy to be involved in. And in terms of works, what type of people? It's people who works in corporate professionals, to creative artists, to people in academia, people in whole walks of life. But like I was saying, that really, the point is not really where they're coming from, or what they do. It's more like, how do they see life, and what's true for them, and again, like, who they really feel they are, not even who they think they are, who do they feel they are, because oftentimes we're not even sure what they're thinking is, but we feel who we are. So yeah, that's how I work with people and connect with people.
Great. Well, it's a good segue into the next question, which is, can you share some examples of how coaching has helped you or a client?
Yeah. Well, first of all, for myself, it woke me up from this orientation to life that I had, that I have had since, I was born, and this reality that I was operating in. And a lot of the times we all operate in our own reality thinking. People see life the same way, and people experience in this, the same viewpoints. But noticing people's different behaviors, it's like, why are they behaving like that? That doesn't make sense. But clearly, from what they see and how they see the separate world that they feel, it makes perfect sense. So for me, what's one of the biggest realizations with coaching has been having that embodied realization of the separate realities we live in, but from an experiential sense, not so much. I used to have it from a cognitive sense, but now to see when I'm in a separate reality, yeah, this is reality, and how things look so different to the way how I felt yesterday or the day before. So that's been a profound realization for me. And from that perspective, being able to appreciate people for where they're at and how they see it, and how they behave, and also to respond accordingly sometimes, approach it with openness. Sometimes, if they're not, open or willing to see it, step back, put a boundary. So it's doing the practical things. So from that's been one of the biggest challenges. In terms of working with people, one that comes to my mind is this one particular client that I have worked with for quite a while, where she had experienced quite a challenging upbringing as a child, and parents not seeing her where she was and understanding where she was, and she was subjected to a lot of trauma in number of ways, and her and her husband wanting to create a family, but because of all these fears and triggers that she was experiencing, just the idea of having a family was terrifying for her, let alone being with people. So the journey with her was a gentle, very softly, how would I put it? The journey with her was really guided by where she was at, and each time we connected and explored basically what she brought to the table, what we explored, and sharing the understanding of how everything hangs together, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with how she feels, what she feels, and there's nothing wrong with who she truly is. She began to experientially see beyond all that traumatic orientation she had, and how she saw of herself. And like about a year ago, she had her first child, this beautiful daughter, and just seeing their photos, and her husband, and this beautiful baby girl came to the call one day, and just seeing that transformation she had gone through, realizing herself, was it was a gorgeous experience. And it actually also taught me the insatiable potential that exists within a human being, no matter what they've been through, no matter what they feel in that moment going on for them. So that's been a really cool experience for me as well.
Beautiful. And the word that was coming to my mind was just freedom, like freedom from that trauma. And as a father myself, I can I was getting kind of emotional, just the idea of her going from a place of wanting a family but not knowing or being able to have one, to the miracle of having one, and all the gifts that will come of that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Listening to you, it occurs to me, like, as parents, being able to be in that space of understanding and how much that helps. And obviously this client herself, with the understanding that she has, that's the space she's going to be operating in her reality. and her daughter, being able to see that is, it's beautiful. And, like we talked in the past about how we pick up how the world is from people around us, and when children and kids being able to pick up, the truth of how life is and how people are. It creates like a massive level of hope and inspiration for the future generation.
For sure. Well, speaking of giving people hope and inspiration, the next question is, if there's one thing you'd want people to know, what would that be?
What occurs to me is something I saw quite recently, and I saw this thanks to a dear friend of mine in a conversation where I was exploring, how the moment to moment we're having these thoughts, and we're living in the feeling of those thoughts, and something he pointed to me was that, that I didn't see that I create my psychological experience in every moment. And I'm like, no, I know that. He said, no, you don't. And I'm like, so I got curious. And, when you said, like, these feelings come up for you and then you're looking at them, those feelings that are coming up that you can't see the thought of, you're creating them too. And I'm like, say more. So he went on to describe, and like different stories and so on. But then what occurred to me afterward was, everything I'm feeling, everything I'm experiencing, I'm creating it, but I don't know I'm creating it. And what occurred to me, it's the times that you have driven from your home to work or to see your dad or whatever, and you got to the destination and you're like, you can't remember what happened in between.
Yeah.
It's like that where, sorry?
It happens all the time.
Me too. But even though you can't remember how you got there, you did it. That's what occurred to me. I'm creating my psychological experience moment to moment, but I can't see I'm doing it. I don't know that I did it, but just because I can't see, that I did it doesn't mean it didn't happen. So that made me sort of take the pressure off some of these sticky bits that I've been going, where's that coming from? Like, rather than digging and analyzing, I'm like, yeah, I created it, but I just couldn't see it. Doesn't mean, that was not true. So if there was something that, I'd like to share is, whether we believe it or not, or the moments that we can't see it, we're still creating what we feel exactly because of the way our system is thinking about things. Just knowing that, it's a little like, when a little kid realizes, oh, that's my shadow, I don't need to run away from. The same way, the moments that we see, oh, I'm doing it, we're creating it, we just begin to be less hard on ourselves, put less pressure on ourselves. And that in itself, quietens our minds and makes us not worry about things that we're making up, and that evolves us. The whole system just, makes us see things in a different way, new ideas, fresh thinking comes through. So that's a long way of, I guess, sharing what I would share in this moment. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. When you mentioned the kid not being afraid of his own shadow, I was thinking of, as a kid, when you're lying in bed and you look over and there's this shadowy figure in the corner of your room, you realize, oh, that's just my sweatshirt on the chair or on a hook or whatever. But it's the double-edged sword of the vividness of our imagination.
Yeah. I think we run away from our shadows all the time, thinking it's true. I think we still do it, even though we did as kids. So, yeah.
For sure. This has been great, Asanka. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing or exploring some coaching with you?
Sure. My website is creativebylife.com.au. So there's some information about myself and the work I do there. That would be the easiest way to connect with me.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. I've really enjoyed our conversation. We'll talk.
Thanks for the opportunity, Greg. Yeah, much appreciated.
All right. Take care.
Bye.